America has witnessed 45 presidents since our founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence. Each has had vastly different administrations. However, none were so drastically different as the last three commanders-in-chief. Is social media to blame? This episode of World Press looks at the news media in the presidencies of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. How have they used the news media, sometimes referred to as the fourth branch of government? And how have they coped, coddled, and criticized the news media? That's the topic for this edition of World Press. A president points to a reporter and insults him to his face, as well as his entire news agency which employs him. Another journalist is denied access to the White House. Open warfare erupts between the president and the press. The White House last week? No, actually it is the White House for the last 100 years. For example, in 1935, it was open warfare between Franklin Roosevelt and the press. FDR believed if a reporter wasn't for him, it meant he was against him. FDR also knew how to hold long-term grudges. Take his 1937 exchange with New York Times reporter Bob Post, who asked the president about rumors circulating that he was going to seek a third term. FDR shot back, "Oh my God!" Then he handed Post an invisible dunce cap and snapped, "Go into the corner over there, put on the dunce cap, and stand with your back to the crowd." Post was humiliated. In 1962, Look magazine carried an article by Fletcher Nabel called Kennedy versus the Press that was subtitled, "Never have so few bawled out so many, so often for so little as the Kennedys battle reporters." World Press correspondent Ricardo Cordova has a report on how social media has impacted the presidency.
Thank you, Dr. Fellow. The arrival of social media has altered the way in which the world communicates, interacts, and functions. Because of this, the use of social media has erupted in recent years. Social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter have revolutionized the ways people communicate. But Twitter is not solely a social networking site for people to communicate and share memes. Members of the United States government actively use the platform to engage with American citizens. Government officials like senators, congressmen, and congresswomen, and most importantly, the President of the United States use Twitter for political power. Media have always been a vital tool for presidents to use in order to broadcast information, address the nation, and to simply connect with American citizens. Traditional media, like your everyday newspaper, radio, and television, have served an important purpose for past heads of state. It also paved the way for how social media would be used. The newspaper, for example, served as an important medium during its heyday because of its speedy production and accessibility to the masses. The newspaper experienced an increased role in the field of communication. More importantly, it revitalized the methods of communication in the political field. For example, President Abraham Lincoln utilized the newspaper in an unprecedented manner and altered the landscape of newspaper use during the 19th century. Essentially, Lincoln deviated from the traditional application of having an official newspaper and opted to circulate his messages through another avenue, effectively creating the journalistic free-for-all that remains today. From the start, radio frightened newspapers. It possessed many advantages to the newspaper and offered multiple benefits for consumers, including an almost instantaneous transmission of communication and more stimulated sense of entertainment. Radio was essentially an upgrade to the newspaper, and it reshaped mass communication in the political field, like the newspaper had once done. Although radio proved to be an important piece of technology during the early 20th century, it would be overtaken, like the newspaper. The television emerged in the mid-20th century as the newest form of mass communication and the most versatile tool for political authority. Television was used mostly as a medium for advertising with respect to politics, and it received a significant amount of criticism. Later on, Barack Obama became the first sitting president to utilize Twitter. His engagement with the social media platform began even before his presidency, helping him win the 2008 presidential election. Similarly, Donald Trump used the same communicative powers of Twitter during the 2016 presidential election, which ultimately won him the presidency. While Obama used the well-known optimistic "hope" slogan to propel him into the presidency, Trump used a different, more provocative tactic. Trump cleverly employed Twitter's far-reaching grasp and instant communication to humiliate traditional forms of media. Essentially, Twitter, and possibly other social media platforms, may not be the most suitable grounds for political talk. They lack a sturdy ground where civilized political discussion can occur. In the end, President Trump may not be entirely to blame for the outrage toward the media that has occurred in recent years. Ultimately, it is a combination of two things: Twitter's inability to host a respectful political setting in combination with Trump's lavish tweets that enable the creation of media scandals.
Ricardo, President Trump believes that, and rightly so, that his tweets get more circulation than any newspaper in the United States can provide him, and he's able to control the message. So thank you for that report, and World Press will return after this message.
If you love music, this is for everyone. It doesn't matter what major you are.
This is such a warm place to come get involved and to meet people.
If you want to do this, you should do it. You don't need any experience at all.
Our entire crew loves music, and this is the one place where they can just let go and be free.
What makes Titan Radio special is that this is the music taste of just students.
Titan Radio just gives you the freedom to basically just be who you are.
Every student should take advantage of this radio station. You'll gain valuable life lessons that you won't gain inside of the classroom. Our DJs and our volunteers actually move on from here and get outside jobs. They land their first internships, they nail their interviews because they have this on their resume.
I 100% recommend people to get involved. And the process for getting involved is as easy as going online and applying on our website.
Titan Radio is expressive, fun.
It's a party.
I love my job. I've probably learned more here at the station than I have my entire life.
9/11 and the U.S. involvement in the Middle East has had an impact on relations between the president and the press. World Press correspondent Matthew Haynes has that report for us. Matthew?
Thank you, Dr. Fellow. The U.S.'s involvement in the Middle East has varied throughout history. The seismic shift in attitudes of Americans following this event helped to justify foreign military intervention, curtailed domestic freedoms, and left those who lived through it with a sense of fear and insecurity lasting up until today. The Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations have had very different relationships with the press, even though they share similarities in the coverage when dealing with the U.S. involvement in the Middle East. In the aftermath of 9/11, entered the U.S. into a global war on terror, leaving every president since facing an enemy unlike any other. Since the beginning of the war on terror, there have been many other events, including U.S. military intervention and involvement in Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, the killing of al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, the rise of the Islamic State, continued complications with Israel and Palestine, ineffective treaties, and a long list of others. These events and the inability of the U.S. to fully achieve its objectives has led to a state of unavoidable conflict in the Middle East. This continuous problem area has caused Presidents Bush, Obama, and Trump to act as wartime commanders-in-chief throughout their administrations. 15 years after the beginning of the Iraq War, Americans are still divided on whether it was the right decision in the first place. According to the Pew Research Center, 53% of Americans believe that the government mostly failed to accomplish its goals in Iraq. This type of attitude has influenced press coverage of the U.S. involvement in other countries. Major media outlets have covered the decisions made by Bush, Obama, and Trump regarding the Middle East policy in a way that was consistent with many Americans' views, which was negative. All three experienced some sort of negative coverage of their actions, such as Bush's mission accomplished speech, Obama's executive drone strikes, Trump's confusing announcement of a withdrawal from Syria, among many others. The media has been consistent in highlighting the failures and mishaps in the Middle East, offering the American public a perspective to the government's justification for conflict not like their own. Some may argue that President Obama received more favorable coverage from the press than Presidents Bush or Trump, but this does not include his coverage of Middle East policies. While Obama had significant accomplishments in the Middle East, including ordering the mission that killed Osama bin Laden, other choices of his still drew the anger of major publications. For instance, in January 2014, President Obama referred to ISIS as a JV team who did not pose a serious threat. In fact, ISIS proved to be more dangerous than the administration had anticipated. This was not his only slip-up. He also claimed that ISIS had been contained just a day before the 2015 rock concert mass shooting that stunned Europe and killed more than 120 people in Paris. the administration had underestimated the danger that ISIS posed to both the Middle East and the United States. Of these three administrations, President Trump has had arguably the worst relationship with the press. He regularly refers to them as the enemy of the people and uses the term fake news when discussing their coverage. Another point of criticism has been Trump's decision to withdraw from the U.S. From the Iran nuclear deal, brokered under the Obama administration. When covering Trump's announcement in 2018, journalist Mark Lander focused on the many perceived negative implications of this action, which Trump characterized as a key campaign promise. The media's consistent portrayal of U.S. policy in the Middle East is often in a negative light following the Bush administration's military response to 9/11. It has continued through the administrations of both Obama and Trump. While Bush, Obama, and Trump have all had different relationships with the press, this coverage is in some ways a shared trend.
Thank you for that report, Matthew, on how the coverage of the conflict in the Middle East has been similar across presidencies. World Press will return after this short break.
Maybe he's really focused.
Hey, Michael. Michael. Maybe he likes spinning the wheels.
Maybe he just loves trucks.
Maybe he's just being a boy.
Preoccupation with objects is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today. The sooner it's diagnosed, the better.
The Espionage Act is a very important part to America's governing policies. For more on what this act is and how President Obama used it more than any president in history, we turn to World Press correspondent Christopher Park.
Thank you, Dr. Fellow. Leading up to Barack Obama's eventual presidential win, then-candidate Obama repeatedly expressed that his administration would operate with a philosophy of transparency to the American public. However, journalists and people advocating for the so-called transparency that was promised were routinely unconvinced and were often frustrated by the administration's refusal to disclose information. In the most extreme circumstances, they even wanted to prosecute leakers and the journalists who published those leaks by utilizing the Espionage Act. In total, the Espionage Act was used by Obama's Department of Justice a total of 8 times, more than all administrations combined. A little history on the Espionage Act. Shortly after America entered World War I by declaring war with Germany in 1917, the Espionage Act was passed by Congress, even though the request for this type of legislation was initially expressed by President Woodrow Wilson in 1915. In his State of the Union address, Wilson said, quote, "I urge you to enact such laws at earliest possible moment and feel that in doing so, I am urging you to do nothing less than save the honor and self-respect of the nation. Such creatures of passion, disloyalty, and anarchy must be crushed out. They are not many, but they are infinitely malignant, and the hand of our power should close over them at once. They have formed plots to destroy property. They have entered into conspiracies against the neutrality of the government. They have sought to pry into every confidential transaction of the government in order to serve interests alien to our own. It is possible to deal with these things very effectually. I need not suggest the terms in which they may be dealt." End quote. The act granted postal officials the ability to ban newspapers and magazines from being distributed, and those found convicted of interfering with military draft efforts could be punished with fines of up to $10,000 and 20 years in jail. By 1918, the act was strengthened by the Sedition Act, which broadened the offense that the act could prosecute on, including disparaging the government, the flag, Constitution, or the military. 2 of the most infamous cases where Obama used the Espionage Act include the prosecution of Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. Manning, an Army private, leaked among many classified items 250,000 U.S. State Department classified papers to WikiLeaks. She was serving a 35-year sentence before President Obama commuted her sentence. As early as 2008, the Justice Department attempted to subpoena Times reporter James Risen to testify at the trial of Jeffrey Sterling, a former CIA officer who leaked classified information on the CIA's failed attempt to damage the nuclear program in Iran. He was first subpoenaed during the Bush administration in 2008. Risen was subpoenaed again in 2011. While President Trump has consistently disparaged the press with claims of media bias and fake news, his rhetoric has not translated into the kind of breathtaking behavior of Obama's administration. At least what is currently known about Trump's administration indicates no substantial action against the press covertly or publicly. Once you separate what is being said and what is being done, this is a case where Obama's administration failed in ways Trump's did not. President Trump routinely ridicules the press, while President Obama expressed no apologies once the public found out that his Justice Department was seizing communication records secretly. Both have done harm to the press, but in this case, Obama did worse.
Thank you for that interesting report, Christopher. World Press will return after this short message.
As Titans, we stand tall, showing the way as a leading CSU and a top public university in the West. Titans support community, providing spaces for coming together that add depth to the human experience. Titans celebrate opportunity, holding high our achievement in making education accessible with tuition well below the national average. Titans welcome challenge, responding to the state's evolving workforce needs and driving economic development. Titans embrace diversity, knowing that our differing backgrounds and perspectives strengthen our students. Titans pursue innovation, creating a university that is an emerging national model for empowering students on their way to a degree. Titans reach higher.
Welcome back to World Press. We began today looking at the history of the press, sometimes referred to as the fourth branch of government, and how Presidents Bush, Obama, and Trump have used the media, and they've used it differently. Joining our World Press Roundtable tonight are World Press correspondents Derek Islas, Anissa Brown, Jennifer West, and Matthew Haynes. Derek, 9/11 was a horrible terrorist attack that affected the entire American population. The sitting president, George W. Bush at the time, used the media to shape public perceptions to the war on terror. President Obama also used the media to get his message to the American people. How did President Bush and Obama differ in their approach to how they got the message out?
Well, Dr. Fellow, I think when comparing the presidencies, it would be important to consider that they were fairly similar in regards to how they got the message out to the people. Where they differed is in how the media presented them and how they capitalized on the public sentiments at that time. George W. Bush, you see, he kind of capitalized on the 9/11 sentiments. The United people were against one opposing force. In the media representations of him, we really saw him kind of capitalize on that and kind of unite Americans against this, again, opposing force. The wars had great success with media coverage and were not criticized until the latter end of his presidency. Obama, on the other hand, very much a victim of the information age, and then when he inherited the war on terror, he was a victim of the media as well and the criticism of it. He kind of had a divided nation and was unable to kind of unify them against one general idea. So unfortunately, he was kind of a victim of the media itself.
Well put. Also, Derek, when we speak of getting the message out and having a young president like Mr. Obama, he had very few press conferences, 44 to be exact, and I find that very interesting and puzzling and discouraging at times. Matthew, President Bush and Obama had very different administrations, yet the media coverage of the conflict in the Middle East was similar. How was the media covering these administrations, and why were they so similar?
So as Derek mentioned, at the beginning of the war on terror and U.S. involvement in the Middle East, press coverage was generally a very positive thing because the country was united, like you were saying, behind this force going forward, trying to rectify what wrongs were inflicted upon the nation. But as the war progressed and the media uncovered things like Bush's false assertion of WMDs, his mission accomplished speech, as noted earlier, that really wasn't a mission accomplished speech at all. That through line continued when Obama inherited the war. U.S. involvement in the war was already still in a very bad place. Obama didn't really garner a lot of positive coverage for his involvement in the Middle East until he ordered the mission that killed Osama bin Laden. But even then, another terrorist organization, as we all know now, ISIS, began forming in the Middle East, and the administration didn't take the proper national security steps to make sure that we were having the CIA, FBI people like that, getting involved and cutting that off before it really hit us in the face. And the administration's couching them as a JV team or somehow not a threat to the U.S. really left a bad taste in the American public's mouth. And that kind of continued throughout his presidency. Now we see Trump dealing with something similar.
Matthew, thank you for that excellent report tonight. Anissa, then we've been talking about President Barack Obama and his misuse, I guess we can say, or not using media during the war in Iraq and the Middle East. But he did use it very effectively in the 2008 campaign for president. And how do you assess that?
Well, Dr. Fellow, President Obama is often regarded as a social media president. He had access to technology that prior presidents like President Bush didn't have access to. And with that came availability to target specific audiences, particularly the younger generation, which is already on platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And he knew how to gauge them and knew how to speak to them and aimed his messages toward them in a way that successfully launched his campaign and also subsequently allowed him to become president.
He was a master at it, and now we have a real master of Twitter in the White House, and
Indeed.
we'll see how that goes. Jennifer, President Trump, speaking of the current president, has utilized social media in a different way than most presidents, and do you think he uses it effectively to get his message across, or are there better platforms that he should be using?
I do think, thank you, Dr. Fall, I do think that he does use social media very well. According to CNN, he has 86.7 million followers across all platforms. He's active on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Snapchat. And according to Brandwatch, he's the top 13 of the top 20 people with followers on Twitter. So I do think he uses it very effectively.
And as you know, he never sleeps. He sleeps about 4 hours a night. And I think at 3 o'clock he begins reading 33 newspapers, I've been told.
Yeah,
and then the Twitter messages begin. An interesting evening talking about the presidents and the press. Very important topic as we approach a new election year coming up. And I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank viewers, the viewing audience, for being here. And please join us for another edition of World Press. For California State University and World Press, I'm Anthony Fellow.